They made me the executor as a joke. I executed their wishes exactly. The lawyer's voice droned through the speakerphone like he was reading a grocery list, not announcing that I just inherited $3.2 million from people who spent 28 years treating me like I was something they'd scrape off their shoe. And therefore, pursuant to the last will and testament of Margaret and Harold Whitmore, we name our beloved niece Sarah Catherine Whitmore as sole executor of this estate, trusting in her wisdom to carry out our final wishes with the love and respect we've always shared. I actually laughed out loud. Love and respect. Right. The conference call went silent except for the sound of my cousin Derek's heavy breathing through his phone. I could picture him in his McMansion in Westchester, face turning that particular shade of purple he got whenever things didn't go his way. My Aunt Linda was probably clutching her pearls so hard she'd leave bruises. I'm sorry, Derek finally sputtered. There must be some mistake. Sarah hasn't spoken to Uncle Harold and Aunt Margaret in 3 years. She didn't even come to the funeral. Because I wasn't invited, I said pleasantly, examining my chipped black nail polish. I was sitting in my studio apartment above the tattoo parlor where I worked, wearing ripped jeans and a tank top that read, "Ask me about my emotional damage." The contrast wasn't lost on me. Remember? You said it was family only. Mr. Pemberton, the family lawyer, cleared his throat. The will is quite specific. Ms. Sarah Whitmore is named as sole executor. The document is dated January 15th of this year and was properly witnessed and notarized. January 15th. That was 2 days after the infamous Christmas incident, where I'd finally told the whole family exactly what I thought of their passive-aggressive bullshit and walked out of Margaret's house for the last time. Harold had followed me to the driveway, shouting about how I was an ungrateful little gutter rat who would never see a dime from their family. Looks like Harold had the last laugh after all. Or thought he did. This is ridiculous, Linda chimed in, her voice shrill. Margaret always said Sarah was just a phase. She can't possibly be trusted with. With what? I interrupted. With your inheritance. The silence stretched out like a held breath. See, here's what my loving family didn't know. I'd spent the last 5 years getting my paralegal certification while working nights at the tattoo shop. Partly because I was tired of being broke, but mostly because I was tired of being treated like an idiot by people who thought money made them smart. I knew enough about estate law to understand exactly what was happening. Margaret and Harold had made me executor as a final fuck you. They'd filled their will with deliberately vague language and contradictory instructions, expecting that I'd be too stupid or too overwhelmed to handle it properly. Then their precious Derek and Linda would swoop in, petition the court to have me removed for incompetence, and get a real lawyer to fix everything. They'd get their money, I'd get humiliated one last time, and even in death, Margaret and Harold would prove that the black sheep of the family was still just a joke. There was just one problem with their plan. I wasn't planning to be incompetent. Mr. Pemberton, I said, my voice steady as steel, I accept the role of executor. When can I review the full will? The sound of Derek's strangled gasp was music to my ears. Mr. Pemberton's office smelled like leather and old money, the kind of place where my family had conducted business for 3 generations while I was explicitly told I wasn't mature enough to be involved. Now I sat across from his mahogany desk in my best attempt at respectability, black blazer over dark jeans, combat boots swapped for actual shoes, watching him flip through a document thick enough to choke a horse. I have to say, Ms. Whitmore, this is one of the more creative wills I've encountered in 30 years of practice. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and gave me a look that was part sympathy, part curiosity. Your aunt and uncle were very specific about certain elements while being frustratingly vague about others. I leaned forward. Show me the creative parts. He turned to page 4, his finger tracing down a paragraph dense with legal language. Here, for instance. They've left a sum befitting their station in the family to Derek Whitmore, and an amount reflecting our deep appreciation for her years of devoted care to Linda Morrison. No specific dollar amounts. And the rest? Gets more interesting. He flipped ahead several pages. They've established what they call the Whitmore Family Values Foundation, $2.8 million to be distributed to causes that embody the moral principles and social values that Harold and Margaret Whitmore held most dear throughout their exemplary lives. Again, no specific organizations named. I felt a slow smile creeping across my face. So I get to decide what causes best represent their values. As executor, yes. You have broad discretionary power. Pemberton's expression suggested he was beginning to understand why I looked pleased rather than overwhelmed. There are a few specific bequests, $50,000 to their church, $25,000 to the country club for a memorial garden. But the bulk of the estate is entirely at your discretion, provided you can justify your choices as reflecting their wishes. This was even better than I'd hoped. Margaret and Harold had been so focused on humiliating me that they'd handed me a weapon I could use to destroy everything they actually cared about. What about time frames? I asked. How long do I have to make these distributions? The will specifies that all bequests must be completed within 6 months of probate closing, which should be in about 3 weeks. However, he hesitated, then pulled out another document. I received this yesterday. It was a letter from Hartwell, Blackstone and Associates, the kind of white shoe law firm that charged $800 an hour to intimidate people. The letterhead alone was designed to make you surrender. Derek has retained counsel, Pemberton explained. They're challenging your appointment as executor, claiming you're unfit due to your estrangement from the family and lack of relevant experience in financial management. I read through the letter twice, my jaw tightening with each pompous legal phrase. They were moving fast, a court hearing was scheduled for next Tuesday, just 5 days away. Derek wasn't wasting time. Can they win? I asked. Pemberton shrugged. Depends on the judge. You're named clearly in the will, but if they can demonstrate that your appointment was made during a period when your aunt and uncle weren't thinking clearly, or that you lacked the competency to handle an estate this size. He didn't need to finish. I could read between the lines. Derek had money for expensive lawyers and a lifetime of being the golden child. I had a paralegal certificate and a reputation as the family screw-up. But I also had something Derek didn't expect. I'd learned to fight dirty in places where fighting clean got you eaten alive. Mr. Pemberton, I said, standing up and straightening my blazer, I'm going to need copies of everything. And I mean everything. It was time to show my family exactly how competent I could be. I spent the next 48 hours doing something I'd never had the luxury of before, fighting back with actual ammunition. My cramped apartment transformed into a war room. Legal documents covered every surface, copies of the will, financial statements, correspondence between Margaret, Harold, and their various lawyers dating back 15 years. I'd requested everything, and Pemberton had delivered. Turns out when you're the official executor, people have to give you what you ask for. What I found in those files made my years of family therapy look like a pleasant chat. There were emails between Margaret and Derek discussing my inevitable failure as executor, dated just 2 weeks after the will was signed. Harold had written to their financial advisor, explicitly stating their intention to create maximum confusion in the estate planning so that the girl would be forced to step aside for someone competent. But the real gold mine was a recorded phone call transcript from March. Apparently Harold's paranoia about family loyalty extended to keeping records of everything. Margaret was talking to Linda about their perfect solution to what they called the Sarah problem. She'll try to handle it herself out of spite, Margaret had said. But she's never managed anything more complicated than splitting a restaurant check. Derek's lawyer will have her removed within a month, and she'll slink back to that little tattoo parlor knowing she was beaten by her betters one last time. Linda's response was even better. It's almost merciful, really. She needs to learn her place. I printed everything. Highlighted the best parts. My paralegal training had taught me that family court judges hated being manipulated, and this was manipulation so blatant it practically glowed in the dark. Then I made some calls. Camden County Family Court, Judge Rodriguez's office. Hi, this is Sarah Whitmore. I'm the executor of the Whitmore estate that has a hearing scheduled for Tuesday. I'd like to file a countermotion and submit additional evidence. What type of evidence, Ms. Whitmore? I looked at the stack of documents on my coffee table, 28 years of rage crystallizing into something sharp and purposeful. Evidence of fraud and manipulation in the creation of the will that directly contradicts the petitioner's claims. By Thursday afternoon, I had an appointment with someone Derek definitely wasn't expecting me to contact, Margaret and Harold's longtime accountant, Robert Chen. Chen had been doing their taxes for 12 years, which meant he knew exactly how much money we were really talking about, and where all of it had come from. I met him at a coffee shop downtown, far from the country club circuit where he might run into Derek or Linda. I have to be careful here, Chen said, stirring his latte nervously. Client confidentiality doesn't end with death, but as executor, you have rights to financial information. I'm not asking you to violate anything, I said. I just need to understand the full scope of what I'm dealing with. He pulled out a folder, much thinner than I'd expected. The $3.2 million figure is accurate, but here's what's interesting, most of it isn't old family money like everyone assumes. I leaned forward. What do you mean? Harold inherited about $400,000 when his parents died. Everything else came from a lawsuit settlement in 2018, medical malpractice. A botched surgery that left Margaret with chronic pain for the last 5 years of her life. The coffee shop seemed to fade around me. How much was the settlement? $2.9 million, after legal fees. Margaret had spent her final years in constant pain, and somehow that had turned into nearly $3 million that my family was now fighting over like vultures. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. There's something else, Chen continued, his voice dropping. Harold made some unusual changes to their charitable giving in January. Stopped all donations to their usual organizations, the church, the Republican Party, the private school scholarship fund. When I asked why, he said they were restructuring their philanthropic priorities. I felt puzzle pieces clicking into place. He was planning the foundation. Exactly. But Sarah. Chen looked around, then leaned closer. I don't think he expected to die before explaining what he actually wanted done with that money. Now I had everything I needed. The question was whether I'd get the chance to use it. The hearing was supposed to be a formality. Derek's lawyer, a silver-haired shark named Wellington Price III, had probably told him they'd waltz in, present their case about my obvious incompetence, and walk out with control of the estate. What they got instead was me, sitting at the respondent's table in a borrowed Navy suit, with a briefcase full of evidence and 3 years of paralegal training that I was finally ready to use. Judge Rodriguez looked like she'd seen every family drama the county had to offer and was tired of all of them. She glanced at the case file, then at Derek and his expensive legal team, then at me sitting alone with my yellow legal pad. Mr. Price, you've petitioned to remove Ms. Sarah Whitmore as executor of the Whitmore estate. Please present your argument. Price stood with the kind of theatrical flourish that probably impressed his country club friends. Your Honor, my client Derek Whitmore seeks to protect his late aunt and uncle's legacy from someone who is wholly unqualified to handle an estate of this magnitude. Ms. Whitmore has no experience in financial management, no business education, and was estranged from the decedents for years before their death. He painted a picture of me as a reckless child who'd abandoned her family and couldn't be trusted with their life's work. It was a compelling narrative, professionally delivered, and completely unprepared for what I was about to drop on them. Furthermore, Price continued, we believe the decedents were not in their right mind when they made this appointment, given the, shall we say, unconventional nature of their relationship with Ms. Whitmore. Judge Rodriguez turned to me. Ms. Whitmore, how do you respond? I stood up, my hand surprisingly steady. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that directly contradicts Mr. Price's claims about my aunt and uncle's mental state and intentions. Price actually scoffed. What evidence could she possibly? Evidence that shows the petitioner and his mother conspired with the decedents to deliberately sabotage this estate, intending to use the court system to circumvent the legal will. I placed the first document on the judge's bench. This is an email dated February 3rd, from Margaret Whitmore to Derek Whitmore, with the subject line, Our Perfect Plan. The color drained from Derek's face as Judge Rodriguez began reading aloud, Derek, darling, your idea is absolutely brilliant. We'll make Sarah the executor and watch her fail spectacularly, then you can petition the court to fix our mistake. She'll be humiliated, and you'll get everything exactly as it should be. I placed the second document down. This is a recorded transcript of a phone call between Margaret Whitmore and Linda Morrison, dated March 18th, discussing what they called the Sarah problem, and how my inevitable failure would teach me to know my place. Price was on his feet. Your Honor, the source of these documents is questionable at best. The source is Harold Whitmore's own filing system, I said calmly. Everything was properly maintained by their accountant and is part of the official estate records that I, as executor, have every right to access. Judge Rodriguez held up her hand for silence. She read through the transcripts, her expression growing darker with each page. When she looked up at Derek, her voice was ice cold. Mr. Whitmore, are you telling me that you retained counsel to challenge an appointment that your family made specifically hoping it would fail, so you could challenge it? Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Price tried to recover, Your Honor, regardless of the decedent's motivations. The motivations matter quite a bit when you're asking me to overturn a legal will, Rodriguez snapped. She looked at me with what might have been approval. Ms. Whitmore, do you have additional evidence? I smiled. Yes, Your Honor. Quite a bit more. The next document I placed on Judge Rodriguez's bench was my paralegal certification, followed by transcripts from my estate law courses. Derek's lawyer had painted me as an uneducated tattoo artist, but the numbers told a different story. 3.8 GPA, specialized coursework in probate and estate administration, and a letter of recommendation from Professor Martinez that specifically praised my meticulous attention to legal detail and ethical responsibility. Your Honor, I continued, Mr. Price claimed I lack relevant experience. But I've spent 2 years studying exactly this type of law, while working full-time to pay for my education. Unlike some people, I didn't have family money to coast on. Derek shot up from his chair. This is ridiculous. You can't just. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore, Judge Rodriguez said sharply. She was reading my transcripts now, and I could see her eyebrows rising at my grades in estate planning and fiduciary responsibility. Continue, Ms. Whitmore. I pulled out the final piece of my counterattack, Robert Chen's financial analysis. Your Honor, I've also discovered that my aunt and uncle made significant changes to their charitable giving patterns in the months before their death. They stopped donating to organizations they'd supported for decades. The First Presbyterian Church received $5,000 annually for 8 years, then nothing after January. The Riverside Country Club, the Heritage Foundation, the Private School Scholarship Fund, all cut off simultaneously. Price looked confused, but Derek had gone pale. He was starting to understand where this was heading. This wasn't random, I continued. Harold Whitmore told their accountant they were restructuring their philanthropic priorities. He was planning something specific for that foundation money. The question is, what would Harold and Margaret Whitmore have wanted their legacy to represent? I placed one more document on the bench. This one had taken some digging, but it was worth it. This is a copy of a letter Harold wrote to the editor of the County Herald in 2019, expressing his deep concern about the moral decay of modern society and his belief that young people today lack the discipline and work ethic that built this nation. Judge Rodriguez read the letter, which was vintage Herald, 3 pages of ranting about participation trophies and entitled millennials who expected everything handed to them. The irony of Derek trying to use the court system to grab an inheritance he hadn't earned was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Based on this evidence, I said, I believe my aunt and uncle's true intention was to test whether I could overcome their deliberate sabotage and prove myself worthy of handling their legacy. They expected me to fail, but they also gave me the tools to succeed, if I was smart enough and determined enough to use them. Price was scrambling now. Your Honor, this is pure speculation. Ms. Whitmore is constructing a narrative that's supported by documented evidence, Rodriguez interrupted. Unlike your client's petition, which appears to be based on exactly the kind of entitlement Harold Whitmore was complaining about. She looked directly at Derek. You want this court to overturn a legal will because you don't like the result. That's not how the law works. She gathered the documents and stood up. I'm denying the petition to remove Ms. Whitmore as executor. Furthermore, I'm ordering Mr. Whitmore to pay all court costs and Ms. Whitmore's legal fees for having to defend against this frivolous challenge. Derek's face went from pale to purple. This is insane. She's going to destroy everything our family built. Your family built a plan to humiliate someone through the legal system, Rodriguez said coldly. It didn't work out the way you hoped. As the judge left the courtroom, I gathered my papers with steady hands. Derek was whispering furiously with his lawyer, probably already planning an appeal. But appeals took time, and I had work to do. 6 months to distribute $2.8 million to causes that represented Harold and Margaret's values. I was going to enjoy every single donation. The victory in court felt good for about 36 hours. Then Derek's real counterattack began. I was at the tattoo shop Thursday evening, cleaning my station after inking a dragon sleeve, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar, cold, professional, and expensive. Ms. Whitmore, this is Wellington Price. I represent Derek Whitmore. I thought we settled this in court, I said, not bothering to hide my satisfaction. Judge Rodriguez was pretty clear. The court hearing was just the opening move, Price said smoothly. My client has asked me to make you aware of certain complications that might arise during your tenure as executor. I stopped cleaning and gave him my full attention. What kind of complications? Well, for instance, the IRS might find it interesting to know that someone with your limited income has suddenly come into control of over $3 million. Tax investigations can be quite thorough. Time-consuming. They might freeze the entire estate pending a full audit. My blood went cold. You can't. Oh, we absolutely can. We can also petition the Surrogates Court for a full accounting of every decision you make, every dollar you spend. Did you know that executors can be held personally liable for any distributions that are later deemed inappropriate? If a judge decides you violated your fiduciary duty, you could be forced to repay every penny from your own assets. I gripped the phone tighter. The will gives me discretionary power. Discretionary power isn't unlimited power, Ms. Whitmore. Every donation has to serve the estate's best interests and align with the decedent's documented wishes. We'll be watching very carefully to ensure you understand that. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my reflection in the shop's front window. Derek wasn't trying to remove me as executor anymore, he was trying to paralyze me with legal threats until the 6-month deadline passed. Then the estate would go into default, a real lawyer would take over, and Derek would get his money after all. But two could play the harassment game. Friday morning, I called my own lawyer. Not some solo practitioner from the Yellow Pages. I called Janet Morrison at Morrison and Associates, the firm that handled discrimination cases against big corporations. Her retainer cost me 2 months' rent, but she had something Price didn't expect: genuine outrage at wealthy people trying to bully their way out of legal consequences. Let me understand this, Janet said after I'd explained everything. Your cousin is threatening to weaponize government agencies because a judge ruled against him. That's about the size of it. And he's doing this through his lawyer, creating a paper trail of intimidation tactics. She actually chuckled. Ms. Whitmore, your cousin just made a very expensive mistake. By Monday, Derek had bigger problems than me. Janet had filed a complaint with the State Bar Association against Wellington Price for threatening frivolous legal action to coerce a fiduciary into abandoning their legally appointed duties. She'd also sent a certified letter to Derek personally, informing him that any further attempts to interfere with my execution of the will would result in a harassment lawsuit seeking both damages and attorney fees. The threatening phone calls stopped immediately. But I knew Derek wasn't giving up, he was just changing tactics. That became clear Wednesday afternoon when I got a call from Father Mackenzie at St. Catherine's, Margaret and Harold's church. Sarah, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. His voice was carefully neutral. I wanted to discuss the memorial fund your aunt and uncle established. The $50,000 for the church was already approved, I said. Pemberton should have sent the paperwork. Yes, well, that's wonderful. But Derek mentioned that you might be considering additional donations. He thought perhaps the bulk of the foundation money might go to religious organizations that your aunt and uncle supported. I almost laughed. Derek was making end runs around me, trying to convince people to lobby for specific donations before I could make my own decisions. He probably figured that pressure from their priest, their country club friends, and their social circle would force me to play it safe with conventional charities. He was wrong. Father Mackenzie, I said sweetly, I appreciate your concern, but the foundation's priorities are still being finalized. You'll be among the first to know when I've made my decisions. After I hung up, I opened my laptop and started researching. If Derek wanted to play games, I'd show him exactly how creative my interpretation of Harold and Margaret's values could be. It was time to get started on the real work. The research took 3 weeks, but it was the most satisfying work I'd ever done. I started with Harold's own words. Turns out my dear uncle had been quite vocal about his beliefs over the years: letters to editors, social media posts, country club newsletter articles. Margaret too. They'd left a detailed paper trail of exactly what they considered moral principles and social values. Harold believed strongly in personal responsibility and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. He'd written extensively about how government assistance created dependency and how handouts destroyed the American work ethic. Margaret was passionate about traditional family values and had donated regularly to organizations opposing marriage equality. Both of them loved talking about how entitled young people were destroying society. Perfect. I made my first call on a Tuesday morning, sitting in Pemberton's conference room with a stack of donation paperwork spread across the mahogany table. Good morning, this is Sarah Whitmore from the Whitmore Family Values Foundation. I'd like to discuss a potential grant. The woman on the other end of the line sounded cautiously optimistic. Of course, Ms. Whitmore. What type of grant are we discussing? We have $400,000 available for organizations that help people achieve self-sufficiency through education and job training. Specifically, we're interested in programs that serve formerly incarcerated individuals transitioning back into society. There was a pause. That's wonderful. We run exactly that type of program here at Second Chance Newark. May I ask what inspired your foundation's interest in criminal justice reform? I smiled, thinking of Harold's rants about thugs and criminals getting coddled by the system. The foundation's founders believe deeply in personal responsibility and second chances. They felt that everyone deserves an opportunity to prove their worth through hard work and determination. Technically true. Harold did believe in personal responsibility, he just thought most people were incapable of it. My second call went to the Rainbow Youth Alliance. We're prepared to offer $350,000 for LGBTQ+ youth services, I explained to their development director. Housing, counseling, educational support, programs that help young people build strong, independent lives regardless of family acceptance. This is incredible, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Do you mind me asking what motivated such a generous donation? The foundation's founders were passionate about family values, I said, perfectly straight-faced. They believed every young person deserves to be supported and loved for who they are, especially when their biological families fail them. Margaret would be spinning in her grave. The thought warmed my heart. By Thursday, I had commitments for $1.2 million. The Immigrant Workers Resource Center got $200,000 for legal aid and job training. The Coalition for Reproductive Rights received $150,000 for their legal defense fund. Planned Parenthood got $100,000, specifically earmarked for services in low-income communities. Each donation came with the same explanation: Harold and Margaret Whitmore believed in supporting people's right to make their own choices about their bodies and their futures. Friday afternoon, Derek called me directly for the first time since the court hearing. What the hell do you think you're doing? He snarled, apparently done with lawyers and intermediaries. I'm executing Harold and Margaret's will, I said calmly. Just like they asked. Bullshit. You're making a mockery of everything they believed in. Am I? Because I have documentation of everything they believed in, Derek. Harold wrote dozens of letters about personal responsibility and self-reliance. Margaret gave speeches about the importance of helping people stand on their own feet. I'm funding organizations that do exactly that. You're giving money to criminals and perverts, Anne. I'm giving money to people who need help becoming self-sufficient, I interrupted. Isn't that what Uncle Harold always said was missing from modern charity? Programs that actually change lives instead of creating dependency. Derek was breathing heavily through the phone. The church is expecting a major donation. The Country Club Memorial Garden. Got exactly what the will specified. $50,000 to St. Catherine's, $25,000 to Riverside Country Club. Everything else goes to the foundation, distributed according to Harold and Margaret's documented values. This isn't what they wanted, and you know it. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. Derek, they made me executor. They could have picked you, or Linda, or any of the lawyers they knew. But they picked me. They trusted me to understand what they really wanted their legacy to represent. They picked you as a joke. Then I guess the joke's on you. After he hung up, I made one more call. The biggest one yet. Good afternoon, this is Sarah Whitmore from the Whitmore Family Values Foundation. I'd like to establish an endowment. The endowment conversation took 40 minutes and left me feeling like I just pulled off the heist of the century. The Harold and Margaret Whitmore Scholarship Fund, I explained to Dr. Patricia Williams at Camden Community College, will provide full tuition assistance for first-generation college students from low-income families. We're talking about a $800,000 endowment, enough to fund 20 students per year in perpetuity. That's extraordinary, Dr. Williams said. What are the selection criteria? I pulled out the notes I'd prepared, each point carefully crafted from Harold's own writings. Priority goes to students who demonstrate exceptional work ethic despite challenging circumstances. Students who've overcome significant obstacles through personal determination. And students pursuing degrees in fields that serve their communities, social work, education, healthcare, public service. Your foundation's founders must have had remarkable vision. They did, I said, thinking of Harold's fury whenever he saw young people he deemed undeserving getting opportunities. They believe that true merit reveals itself in adversity, and that society benefits when we invest in people others might overlook. Harold had believed that, in a way. He just thought it proved most people didn't deserve investment. By the time I hung up, my hands were actually shaking. Not from nerves, from the sheer adrenaline rush of turning 28 years of contempt into something that would genuinely help people. The scholarship fund alone would change hundreds of lives over the next few decades. But Derek wasn't done trying to stop me. Monday morning brought a registered letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, Blackwood, Sterling and Associates. The letterhead was even more intimidating than prices, all Gothic fonts and prestigious addresses. The letter itself was 3 pages of dense legal text that boiled down to a simple threat. Linda Morrison was petitioning for a full forensic accounting of every estate decision I'd made, claiming I was systematically looting Harold and Margaret's legacy. She wanted every donation frozen pending a complete review. I called Janet Morrison immediately. Can they do this? They can try, Janet said grimly. Linda has standing as a beneficiary to request an accounting. But Sarah, this could tie up the estate for months. Maybe years. What about the 6-month deadline? That's the real problem. If the court freezes distributions now, you might not be able to complete everything by the deadline. Then the estate goes into default, and a court-appointed administrator takes over. I stared out my apartment window at the gray October sky, feeling the familiar weight of my family's manipulation settling over me like fog. They were so predictable. When they couldn't win by the rules, they changed the rules. When they couldn't intimidate me directly, they buried me in legal procedures. But there was something they didn't know. Janet, I said slowly, what if I could prove that Linda isn't acting in good faith? That she's deliberately trying to sabotage the will's execution? That would change everything. But you'd need documentation. I might have something. After I hung up with Janet, I called Robert Chen. Harold's paranoia about family loyalty had extended beyond just recording phone calls. He'd also insisted on detailed written records of every family interaction involving money. And Linda had been involved in plenty of those interactions. I need everything you have on Linda Morrison's financial relationship with Harold and Margaret, I told Chen. Loans, gifts, any money that changed hands. That could be sensitive information, Sarah. I'm the executor. Linda's trying to freeze the estate, claiming she's protecting their interests. I need to know if she actually has their interests at heart, or if she has her own agenda. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Give me until Wednesday. I'll pull together what I can. Wednesday's revelation was even better than I'd hoped. Linda Morrison hadn't just been the devoted niece she pretended to be. Over the past 5 years, Harold and Margaret had loaned her $127,000, down payments on her house, her daughter's wedding, her husband's failed restaurant venture, credit card debts that kept mysteriously appearing. The loan documents were meticulously maintained in Harold's files, along with payment schedules that Linda had consistently ignored. She owed the estate $127,000, with interest. But the real goldmine was a series of emails from just 3 months ago, when Linda thought Harold might be changing his will to leave more money to charity. She'd written to Margaret in a panic, we can't let him give away our inheritance to strangers. That money belongs in the family. Our inheritance. Not Harold and Margaret's legacy, Linda's inheritance. I made copies of everything and sent them to Janet with a note, think this is enough to prove bad faith? Her response came back within an hour, oh, this is much better than bad faith. This is fraud. By Friday, Linda's petition was looking a lot less threatening. Janet Morrison didn't waste time with subtlety. By Friday afternoon, she'd filed a countermotion that landed on Linda's doorstep like a legal hand grenade. The motion was beautiful in its simplicity. Linda Morrison couldn't challenge my execution of the estate because she was actively defrauding it. Not only did she owe Harold and Margaret $127,000 in unpaid loans, but her petition to freeze assets was a transparent attempt to avoid repaying that debt before I could discover it. She gambled that you wouldn't dig deep enough into the financial records, Janet explained over the phone. Classic creditor avoidance behavior, create chaos and delay while hiding behind claims of protecting the estate. I was sitting in Pemberton's office, watching him flip through Linda's loan documents with the expression of someone who just found a dead fish in his briefcase. I have to say, Sarah, this puts Linda's petition in a very different light. Different how? Well, as executor, you have not only the right but the obligation to collect outstanding debts owed to the estate. Linda's petition essentially asks the court to prevent you from doing your job while she continues to avoid paying money she legally owes. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I had 4 days to prepare for what was shaping up to be the final battle with my family. But Derek wasn't waiting for Tuesday. Saturday morning, I was at the grocery store when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, check your email. Now. The message had no signature, but the attachment made its origin clear. Someone had sent me a screenshot of a Facebook post from Derek's account, dated just 20 minutes earlier. Praying for my family today as we fight to protect my aunt and uncle's legacy from someone who's trying to destroy everything they worked for. Sometimes the courts need to hear from the community about what kind of person should be trusted with a family's lifetime of sacrifice. Hashtag justice for Harold and Margaret. Hashtag family first. The post had already been shared 37 times. My phone rang before I could fully process what I was looking at. Sarah, it's Janet. We have a problem. I'm looking at it right now. It gets worse. Derek's been busy this weekend. He's contacted the Herald, the community Facebook groups, even some of the organizations you've made donations to. He's painting you as a vindictive outsider who's hijacking the estate for personal revenge. I leaned against my car in the grocery store parking lot, watching normal people go about their Saturday errands while my world tilted sideways again. Can he do that? Isn't it harassment? It's borderline. He's not making specific threats, and he's not lying about easily verifiable facts. But he's definitely trying to create public pressure that could influence Tuesday's hearing. What kind of pressure? Janet's voice was grim. 3 of your donation recipients have called their lawyers. They're worried about accepting money from an estate that's under public scrutiny. The Rainbow Youth Alliance wants to postpone their grant until the legal issues are resolved. My vision actually blurred with rage. Derek was so determined to stop me that he was willing to hurt the exact people these donations were meant to help. Kids who needed housing and counseling were going to suffer because he couldn't accept losing. There's more, Janet continued. Pemberton got a call from Judge Rodriguez's office. Someone, and we both know who, has been calling the courthouse asking questions about the Whitmore case and whether there are community concerns about your fitness as executor. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Then 20. It didn't help. What do we do? We fight back. But Sarah, this is about to get ugly in ways that go beyond legal proceedings. Derek's making this personal in a very public way. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the Rainbow Youth Alliance postponing help for homeless teenagers because Derek wanted his inheritance. I thought about Harold and Margaret designing this exact scenario, putting me in a position where I'd be destroyed whether I succeeded or failed. Yeah, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I'm prepared. The first brick through my apartment window came at 2:17 a.m. Sunday morning. I woke to the sound of shattering glass and the thud of something heavy hitting my bedroom wall. My heart hammered as I grabbed the baseball bat I'd started keeping beside my bed, a precaution that had seemed paranoid 3 days ago but felt prophetic now. The brick had a note rubber banded around it, thief, in block letters, nothing else. I called the police, knowing it was pointless. Officer Martinez took notes with the enthusiasm of someone filling out tax forms, asking questions that made it clear he thought this was probably just neighborhood kids and definitely not worth investigating thoroughly. You been having disputes with anyone lately? He asked, writing down my answer like he was grocery shopping. My family's contesting a will. It's been in the papers. Martinez nodded without looking up. Yeah, these estate things get people worked up. Probably just blow over once the lawyers sort it out. After he left, I swept up the glass and duct taped a garbage bag over the window. Then I sat on my couch until dawn, bat across my knees, listening to every sound in the building and wondering how many of Derek's Facebook friends knew where I lived. The answer came Monday morning when I found my car. Someone had keyed, greedy bitch, across the driver's side door and slashed 2 tires. The tow truck driver shook his head as he loaded it onto his flatbed. This personal or random? He asked. Personal. Yeah, figured. Random vandals don't usually write essays. Janet met me at the tire shop, her face grim. Derek's Facebook post is up to 400 shares. Someone started a hashtag Stop Sarah Whitmore. There's a whole thread of people talking about protecting the community from outsiders who don't understand our values. I signed the credit card receipt for $340 worth of new tires. Any of them actually from this community? That's the interesting part. I had my assistant do some digging. About 60% of the shares are coming from accounts in Westchester County, Derek's neighborhood. He's not just stirring up local anger, he's importing it. The implications hit me like a slap. He's organized this. Gets better. 3 of the most vocal commenters are members of Riverside Country Club. One of them is on the church board with Derek. This isn't organic outrage, it's a coordinated campaign. I thought about that while Janet drove me home. Derek had moved beyond legal harassment into something that looked a lot like witness intimidation. He was trying to make my life so miserable that I'd resign as executor just to make it stop. The really infuriating part was that it might work. Janet, I said as we pulled up to my building, what happens if I step down? Hypothetically. She parked and turned to face me. The court appoints a professional administrator. Probably someone Derek's lawyers recommend. They review all your donations, reverse anything they consider inappropriate, and distribute the money according to conventional charitable priorities. Meaning? St. Catherine's gets $1 million for their building fund. Riverside Country Club gets enough for a nice memorial garden with Harold and Margaret's names on it. Everything's safe, respectable, and exactly what Derek wanted in the first place. I looked up at my apartment window with its garbage bag bandage. Tomorrow's hearing would determine whether I kept control of the estate, but Derek was betting I wouldn't last long enough for it to matter. He was betting I'd break under pressure, just like I always had before. The problem with that theory was simple. I wasn't the same person who'd walked out of Margaret's house 3 years ago. That person had been ashamed of disappointing the family. This person was just getting started. The hearing Tuesday morning felt like walking into an ambush. Judge Rodriguez's courtroom was packed, not with the usual collection of lawyers and clerks, but with faces I recognized from Derek's social media campaign. Margaret's Bridge Club friends sat in the front row like a jury of disapproving vultures. 3 members of the Riverside Country Club board had somehow found time in their busy schedules to attend a probate hearing. Even Father Mackenzie was there, looking uncomfortable but present. Derek sat with his legal team, practically radiating smugness. He'd done everything but sell tickets. Linda's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Vance, stood to address the judge. Your Honor, we're here because the beneficiaries have serious concerns about Ms. Whitmore's management of this estate. In just 3 weeks, she's committed to donations that directly contradict her aunt and uncle's known beliefs and values. She placed a folder on the judge's bench. These are documentation of Harold and Margaret Whitmore's charitable history, 15 years of donations to conservative causes, traditional values organizations, and their local church. Ms. Whitmore has instead directed funds to groups promoting ideologies the Whitmores specifically opposed. Judge Rodriguez flipped through the documents, her expression unreadable. Ms. Whitmore, how do you respond? I stood, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom. Your Honor, the will doesn't specify particular organizations. It directs me to support causes that embody Harold and Margaret's moral principles. I've documented how each donation aligns with values they expressed in their own writings. Your Honor, Vance interrupted, we have witnesses who can testify to the decedent's actual beliefs. I'll bet you do, Rodriguez said dryly, glancing at the packed gallery. This is a probate hearing, not a town hall meeting. But the damage was already being done. Vance called Father Mackenzie to testify about Harold and Margaret's deep Christian faith and their opposition to liberal social policies. Then came Eleanor Hartwell from the Country Club, who spoke about their commitment to traditional American values and their belief that charity should help people without enabling dependency. Each witness painted the same picture, Harold and Margaret as conservative pillars of the community who'd be horrified by my donation choices. It was all true. It was also irrelevant. When my turn came, I pulled out Harold's own letters to the editor. Your Honor, I'd like to read from Harold Whitmore's published writings. Quote, the problem with modern charity is that it creates dependency instead of building character. True compassion means helping people develop the skills and strength to improve their own lives. I looked directly at Derek. Every organization I've funded does exactly that. Second Chance Newark provides job training for people rebuilding their lives. The Scholarship Fund helps students who've demonstrated exceptional work ethic despite challenging circumstances. These donations don't contradict Harold's values, they fulfill them. Vance objected. Ms. Whitmore is manipulating her uncle's words to justify. I'm using his exact words, I said firmly. Harold wrote extensively about personal responsibility and self-reliance. He believed people should be judged by their actions, not their circumstances. The organizations I've supported embody those principles. Judge Rodriguez studied the letters, then looked at the gallery. Mr. Whitmore, she said to Derek, did you organize this public attendance? Derek's face flushed. People have a right to be concerned about. Answer the question. Did you coordinate with community members to attend this hearing? His lawyer whispered something urgent in his ear. I may have mentioned the hearing date to family friends who cared about my aunt and uncle's legacy. And did you suggest they contact any of the organizations Ms. Whitmore has donated to? The courtroom went dead silent. Derek's face went from red to pale. I may have reached out to make sure they understood the situation. Judge Rodriguez leaned forward. Mr. Whitmore, are you telling me you've been contacting charitable organizations to discourage them from accepting donations from an estate you don't control? I felt a surge of vindication so strong it was almost dizzying. Derek had just admitted to witness tampering in open court. But Vance recovered quickly. Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore was simply exercising his right to protect his family's reputation. By interfering with the executor's legal duties, Rodriguez cut her off. Ms. Whitmore, have any organizations withdrawn from agreements due to outside pressure? Yes, Your Honor. 3 organizations have delayed or reconsidered donations specifically because of public pressure and concerns about accepting controversial funds. The judge was quiet for a long moment, studying Derek with obvious distaste. When she spoke, her voice was ice cold. This hearing is adjourned pending a full investigation into potential interference with estate administration. Mr. Whitmore, you and your counsel will remain available for questioning. As the gavel fell, I realized Derek's coordinated campaign had just backfired spectacularly. He'd wanted to prove I was unfit to execute the will. Instead, he'd proven he was unfit to inherit from it. The investigation Judge Rodriguez ordered moved faster than I expected, but not fast enough to stop Derek's escalation. Wednesday afternoon, I was meeting with Dr. Williams at Camden Community College to finalize the scholarship endowment paperwork when my phone started buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. The first voicemail made my blood run cold. This is Amanda Chen from Channel 7 News. We're running a story tonight about contested inheritance and alleged elder abuse in the Whitmore estate case. We'd like to get your response to claims that you manipulated elderly relatives into changing their will before their deaths. Elder abuse. Derek wasn't just trying to freeze my donations anymore, he was trying to destroy me completely. The second call was from Janet, her voice tight with controlled fury. Sarah, where are you right now? Camden Community College. What's happening? Derek's gone nuclear. His people have fed a story to 3 local news stations claiming you coerced Harold and Margaret into making you executor while they were mentally compromised. They're saying you isolated them from family, manipulated them during Margaret's illness, and essentially stole the estate through elder abuse. I sank into a chair in Dr. Williams' office, my hands shaking. That's insane. I barely spoke to them the last 3 years. I know that, you know that, but Derek's got family friends willing to go on camera talking about how Harold and Margaret were confused and frightened in their final months. How you suddenly started hovering around when you heard they were wealthy. The irony was so vicious it took my breath away. Harold and Margaret had spent decades emotionally abusing me, culminating in a will designed to humiliate me one final time. Now Derek was claiming I'd abused them. There's more, Janet continued. Someone leaked details about your donations to the press. Tonight's story is going to focus on how you're stealing from grieving families to fund radical political groups. They have quotes from concerned community members about your extremist agenda. Dr. Williams, who'd been pretending not to listen, cleared her throat gently. Ms. Whitmore, I don't mean to intrude, but if you're facing public scrutiny, the college might need to reconsider the timing of our scholarship announcement. And there it was. Derek's strategy was working exactly as planned. Create enough controversy that legitimate organizations would distance themselves from me, then point to their withdrawal as evidence that even charities thought I was corrupt. Dr. Williams, I said carefully, has anyone from the Whitmore family contacted you directly? She looked uncomfortable. We did receive a call yesterday from someone claiming to represent estate beneficiaries. They suggested we might want to wait until the legal issues were properly resolved before accepting any donations. What did you tell them? That we don't take direction from third parties about our donors, she said firmly. But Ms. Whitmore, if there are criminal allegations. There aren't, I said, standing up. But I understand if you need to protect the college. As I left her office, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek himself, still time to do the right thing. Resign as executor and this all goes away. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, see you in court. By Thursday morning, the story had spread beyond local news. Someone had posted the Channel 7 segment on social media with the headline, Millionaire Inheritance Stolen by Estranged Niece. The video had been shared over 1,000 times, with comments that ranged from skeptical to genuinely threatening. But buried in all the outrage, I found something Derek hadn't expected, people who actually knew Harold and Margaret Whitmore. The comment that changed everything came from someone named Patricia Delacroix. I worked as Harold's nurse during Margaret's final illness. This story is complete BS. Harold hated that girl and talked constantly about how his will was going to teach her a lesson. He was proud of setting her up to fail. Whoever's spinning this elder abuse narrative is lying through their teeth. I screenshotted the comment and sent it to Janet immediately. Her response came back within minutes, found our smoking gun. Can you get in touch with this, Patricia? By Friday, Patricia Delacroix was sitting in Janet's office, providing a sworn affidavit that demolished Derek's entire narrative. Harold was sharp as a tack right up until the day he died, she testified. He talked constantly about Sarah, how much he disliked her, and how clever he'd been making her executor. He said she'd crash and burn, trying to handle estate business, and then Derek could clean up the mess and get the money where it belonged. She had documentation, nursing notes, medication schedules, cognitive assessments. Margaret had been in pain, but neither she nor Harold had shown any signs of mental impairment or undue influence. Harold specifically told me he was leaving Sarah in charge because he knew she'd fail spectacularly, Patricia continued. He called it the perfect revenge for her disrespecting the family. Janet looked across the desk at me with something approaching admiration. Sarah, Derek just handed us grounds for a countersuit that could remove him as a beneficiary entirely. For the first time in days, I smiled. How's that work? Fraud, defamation, interference with estate administration, and attempted witness tampering. If we can prove he's acting in bad faith to subvert the will's execution, the court can bar him from inheriting anything. I thought about Derek's Facebook campaign, his coordination with news outlets, his systematic attempt to destroy my reputation and freeze the estate. Let's prove it, I said. The countersuit hit Derek like a freight train on Monday morning. Janet had worked all weekend crafting what she called a legal masterpiece of documentation. 47 pages of evidence showing Derek's systematic campaign to undermine the estate, complete with screenshots of his social media coordination, phone records of his calls to news stations, and witness statements from Patricia Delacroix. But the real bombshell was buried on page 32. Robert Chen had found another recording in Harold's files. This one's from February, Janet explained, playing the audio on her office speaker. 3 days after Harold signed the final will. Harold's voice crackled through the speakers, talking to someone I didn't immediately recognize. The beauty of it is that she'll destroy herself. Sarah's too stubborn to step aside gracefully, so she'll make increasingly desperate decisions trying to prove herself. Then Derek's people can point to her failures as evidence she was never competent. The other voice responded, and my blood turned to ice when I recognized it. Wellington Price III, Derek's lawyer. The key is documenting everything, Price said on the recording. Every questionable decision, every donation that strays from conventional choices. We build a paper trail showing systematic mismanagement, then petition for removal based on fiduciary incompetence. Harold chuckled. And if that doesn't work, Derek can always challenge individual donations as contrary to our wishes. Tie everything up in court until she runs out of money for lawyers. I sat in Janet's office listening to my uncle and my cousin's attorney planning my destruction with the casual efficiency of people discussing weekend golf plans. The recording was 18 minutes long, 18 minutes of Harold and Price strategizing about legal maneuvers, public pressure campaigns, and media manipulation. Jesus Christ, I whispered. They planned everything. Gets better, Janet said grimly. Or worse, depending on your perspective. She fast-forwarded to the final section, where Harold's voice became almost gleeful. The girl thinks she's so smart with her little paralegal courses. Wait until she realizes she's fighting a war that was designed before she even knew there was a battle. The recording ended with Price laughing. By the time we're done, she'll be so grateful to escape with her reputation intact, she won't even fight the settlement. Janet turned off the player. Sarah, this is a smoking gun the size of a nuclear missile. Harold and Derek's lawyer conspired to sabotage the will's execution before Harold was even dead. That's not just bad faith, it's potential fraud and conspiracy. I stared at the transcript, my hands actually trembling. Can we use this in court? We can do better than that. Wellington Price is about to have a very bad conversation with the State Bar Association. Attorneys aren't allowed to help clients undermine legal documents they helped create. My phone buzzed with a call from Derek. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message on speaker. Sarah, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Maybe we should talk about resolving this whole situation amicably. As family. His voice had lost all its previous arrogance. He sounded almost desperate. He knows, I said. Someone tipped him off about the recording, Janet agreed. Price probably called him the second he got served with the bar complaint. I looked at the calendar on Janet's wall. It was November 15th, exactly 4 months since Harold and Margaret died, 2 months until the estate deadline. Derek had spent all this time trying to destroy me, and now he was realizing his own lawyer had created evidence that could destroy him instead. My phone rang again. Derek, again. This time, I answered. Hello, cousin, I said pleasantly. Sarah, we need to talk. I'm listening. His voice was strained, careful. This has gotten out of hand. Maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement. A compromise. I almost laughed. What kind of compromise? You keep executor status, but we agree on more, traditional donation choices. Split the difference. Everyone wins. Everyone meaning you get what you want after spending 2 months trying to destroy my life. I was protecting the family legacy. You were protecting your inheritance, I cut him off. There's a difference. Sarah, please. We're family. Now I did laugh, sharp and bitter. Derek, you spent 28 years making sure I knew I wasn't really family. You don't get to play that card now. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Derek spoke again, his voice was flat. You're making a mistake. You think you've won, but this isn't over. You're right, I said. It's not over. But I'm not the one who should be worried anymore. After I hung up, Janet was grinning like a shark who'd just smelled blood in the water. Now that, she said, sounded like a woman who's ready to finish what they started. The next morning brought a revelation that changed everything I thought I knew about Harold and Margaret's intentions. I was sorting through the final boxes of estate documents when I found it, a sealed envelope marked, for executor only, in Harold's distinctive handwriting, buried beneath years of tax returns and insurance policies. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter dated January 20th, just 5 days after they'd made me executor. Sarah, it began, if you're reading this, it means you've survived long enough to actually execute our will. Frankly, I'm surprised. The letter was 3 pages of Harold's cramped handwriting, and every word made my understanding of the past 4 months crumble and rebuild itself. Margaret and I knew exactly what we were doing when we named you executor. Not because we thought you'd fail, but because we knew you were the only one ruthless enough to succeed. Derek is weak. Linda is greedy. But you've got the killer instinct this family bred into you, even if you've spent years pretending otherwise. My coffee went cold as I read, my mind reeling. The will's vague language wasn't meant to humiliate you, it was meant to give you the tools to destroy Derek and Linda if they tried to steal what we built. We knew they'd challenge you. We counted on it. Every conversation I recorded, every document I kept, was ammunition for the war we knew was coming. The letter detailed everything, how Harold had deliberately fed information to Wellington Price, knowing the lawyer's arrogance would lead him to create evidence of conspiracy. How Margaret had shared their real, charitable preferences with the country club crowd, ensuring Derek would have witnesses to support a challenge that would ultimately backfire. The beauty of it, Harold had written, is that Derek will destroy himself trying to destroy you. He'll reveal exactly the kind of entitled, manipulative person he really is, and you'll have the documentation to prove it. But the final paragraph made my hands tremble. We never loved you, Sarah. But we respected you. You're the only one who ever fought back against this family's poison. The only one who walked away rather than let us break you. That's why you get to decide what our money becomes. Not because you're perfect, but because you're strong enough to carry the weight of our choices without becoming us. The letter was signed with a postscript that made me laugh out loud. P.S. The recording equipment is hidden in Margaret's jewelry box. Derek doesn't know about half the conversations I captured. Use them wisely. I sat in stunned silence for 20 minutes, then called Janet. You need to hear this, I said. After I'd read the letter aloud, Janet was quiet for a long moment. Jesus, Sarah. Harold and Margaret weren't trying to destroy you, they were using you to destroy Derek and Linda. But why? Derek was their golden boy. Read that paragraph again. About Derek being weak and Linda being greedy. I scanned back through Harold's spidery handwriting. They knew Derek would challenge me. They wanted him to. More than that. They set up a scenario where Derek would reveal his true character under pressure, and you'd have the legal ammunition to cut him out entirely. Janet's voice carried a mix of admiration and horror. This is the most elaborate family revenge plot I've ever seen. So what do I do now? Well, you have 2 choices. You can use Harold's additional evidence to completely destroy Derek's inheritance claim. I'm talking about reducing his bequest from a sum befitting his station to literally nothing. Or, you can show Derek the letter and watch him realize that his beloved aunt and uncle played him like a violin for months. I thought about Derek's desperate phone call, his sudden willingness to compromise. He had no idea that his destruction had been orchestrated from beyond the grave by the very people he thought he was protecting. Janet, I said slowly, what if I did both? The final hearing was scheduled for December 10th, exactly 6 months after Harold and Margaret died. I had everything planned down to the minute. Derek walked into the courtroom looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 weeks. Wellington Price was notably absent, having been suspended pending the Bar Association's investigation into his conspiracy with Harold. Derek's new lawyer, a nervous-looking man named Phillips, kept shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact. Linda sat behind Derek, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. She'd received my formal demand for repayment of her $127,000 in estate loans the previous week. Her own lawyer had advised her to settle quietly rather than fight a debt with 18% annual interest that she clearly couldn't afford. Judge Rodriguez called the hearing to order, her expression suggesting she was thoroughly tired of the Whitmore family drama. Ms. Whitmore, please present your final accounting of estate distributions. I stood with a thick folder of documentation, every donation meticulously recorded and justified. Your Honor, I've successfully distributed $2.8 million according to Harold and Margaret Whitmore's documented values and wishes. I handed copies to the judge and Derek's lawyer. The Second Chance Newark Job Training Program received $400,000. The Harold and Margaret Whitmore Scholarship Fund was established with an $800,000 endowment. The Rainbow Youth Alliance, Planned Parenthood, and the Immigrant Workers Resource Center received substantial grants totaling $900,000. An additional $700,000 went to 15 smaller organizations focused on education, social services, and community development. Derek's face was purple. Phillips looked like he wanted to object but couldn't find legal grounds. Additionally, I continued, I've collected $127,000 in outstanding debts owed to the estate by beneficiary Linda Morrison, with interest calculated according to the original loan agreements. Judge Rodriguez reviewed the documentation. This appears comprehensive, Ms. Whitmore. Mr. Phillips, do you have objections to any specific distributions? Phillips stood shakily. Your Honor, while the donations appear legally defensible, we maintain that they don't reflect the decedent's true charitable intentions. Mr. Phillips, Rodriguez interrupted, are you asking me to overturn distributions that align with the decedent's own written statements about personal responsibility and community service? Well, no, but... Then we're done with that argument. Now came the moment I'd been planning for weeks. Your Honor, I said, I have one final piece of evidence regarding the estate's administration. I pulled out Harold's letter and the additional recordings from Margaret's jewelry box. These documents reveal that Harold and Margaret Whitmore were fully aware that their appointment of me as executor would be challenged, and they deliberately created legal safeguards to protect their true wishes. I handed copies to the judge while Derek's face went from purple to gray. The recordings demonstrate that any challenges to my executor status were anticipated and prepared for by the decedents themselves. Judge Rodriguez read Harold's letter in complete silence. When she looked up at Derek, her expression was arctic. Mr. Whitmore, are you telling me you've spent 4 months challenging an executor appointment that your uncle specifically designed to withstand your challenges? Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Furthermore, I continued, based on Harold's explicit instructions in this letter, and Derek Whitmore's documented attempts to subvert the estate's administration, I'm recommending that his inheritance be reduced to reflect what Harold called his true worth to this family. I placed the final document on the judge's bench. $1. The minimum required by law to prevent him from challenging the will for being overlooked. The courtroom erupted. Derek shot to his feet, his lawyer grabbed his arm, and Linda actually gasped out loud. Judge Rodriguez banged her gavel. Mr. Whitmore, sit down. Ms. Whitmore, you're telling me the decedent explicitly authorized this reduction? Harold's letter gives me discretionary power to adjust bequests based on beneficiaries' behavior during estate administration. Direct quote, if Derek proves himself to be the grasping, entitled person I suspect he is, Sarah has my full authority to ensure his inheritance reflects his true character. The judge was quiet for 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then she signed the final order. Estate administration approved as presented. Derek Whitmore's bequest is set at $1. Linda Morrison's bequest is reduced by the amount of her outstanding debt to the estate. This court is adjourned. As the gavel fell, I looked at Derek's shocked face and smiled. Harold and Margaret always said you'd get exactly what you deserved, Derek. Turns out they were right. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, nothing fancy, but it had unbroken windows and space for a proper office, when the final piece of poetic justice arrived in my mailbox. The letter was from Dr. Williams at Camden Community College, with photos of the first 20 Harold and Margaret Whitmore scholars. 20 kids from backgrounds like mine, getting full tuition to study social work, education, and community service. The scholarship would fund students for generations, turning Harold and Margaret's contempt into something that actually helped people. The Second Chance Newark program had used their grant to expand into 3 counties. The Rainbow Youth Alliance had opened a new housing facility. Planned Parenthood had funded legal clinics in rural areas where reproductive health care was under attack. Every dollar of Harold and Margaret's money was now working to support exactly the kind of people and causes they'd spent their lives opposing. And it was all completely legal, thoroughly documented, and totally irreversible. Derek had tried to appeal the court's decision, but his new lawyers took one look at Harold's letter and the recorded conversations and advised him to walk away. Linda had quietly paid her debt and disappeared back to her McMansion, presumably to explain to her husband why their retirement fund was suddenly $127,000 lighter. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet, saw the college newsletter article about your scholarship recipients. Harold and Margaret would be spinning in their graves. I typed back, that was always the plan. Because that was the beautiful irony of it all. Harold and Margaret thought they were using me to destroy Derek while controlling their legacy from beyond the grave. But they'd miscalculated one crucial thing, they'd given me the power to decide what their values really meant. They'd spent their lives believing that people like me, the poor, the different, the ones who didn't fit their narrow definition of worthiness, were inherently inferior. They'd turned that prejudice into a game, expecting me to fail so their golden boy could swoop in and restore the proper order. Instead, I'd taken their own words about personal responsibility, hard work, and moral character, and used them to fund programs that actually embodied those values. Every donation was a middle finger to their hypocrisy, wrapped in the respectability of their own rhetoric. The tattoo shop where I still worked part-time had a new piece of flash art on the wall, a design I'd drawn myself. It showed a phoenix rising from a pile of legal documents, with the words, "Some inheritances are worth the fight," curved around the bottom. I'd gotten it tattooed on my forearm last week, right over the scar from where Derek's brick had cut me when it shattered my window. Some wounds were worth keeping as reminders. My paralegal certification was framed on the wall next to a photo of the scholarship recipients. 20 kids who'd proven their worth despite circumstances that people like Harold and Margaret would have used to write them off entirely. That was Harold and Margaret's real legacy, not the money itself, but the proof that their fundamental beliefs about human nature were wrong. The kids they would have dismissed as hopeless were using their inheritance to build better lives and serve their communities. And Derek? Last I heard, he was selling his McMansion to pay for his failed legal challenges. Apparently, spending $200,000 on lawyers to fight for an inheritance he'd already lost wasn't the kind of personal responsibility Harold had in mind. I poured myself a glass of wine and toasted the empty room. Thanks for the life lesson, Harold and Margaret. You taught me that the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting everything. The executor had executed their wishes exactly as requested. They just never imagined their wishes might be worth more than their intentions.